My biological father built his bakery with his own hands. He mixed the first batch of dough on a folding table in our garage when I was 7 years old, and by the time I was 12, he had a storefront on Maple Avenue with a hand-painted sign and a line out the door every Saturday morning. He named it after my grandmother. He said her recipes were the reason anyone came back. My stepmother came into our lives 2 years after my mother passed. She was pleasant enough at the beginning, and my father was lonely in the way that quiet men become lonely slowly, without announcing it. He remarried when I was 14. My stepmother brought her daughter Brooke into our home, and Brooke was 17 and already accustomed to being the most important person in any room she entered. She wore that certainty the way some people wear expensive perfume. You could smell it before she arrived and long after she left. For 11 years, I told myself it was fine. I told myself my father's happiness mattered more than the small ways I had been pushed to the edges of my own life. When he got sick, a quiet, relentless illness that stripped him down over the course of 2 years, it was me who took over the bakery. Not Brooke, who had opinions about the branding and the social media presence, but no interest in arriving at 4 a.m. to start the ovens. Not my stepmother, who handled what she called the business side, while I handled everything else. I scheduled the staff. I negotiated with the suppliers. I signed the tax documents, the lease renewals, the insurance policies, the vendor contracts. I signed my name until my signature became a reflex, a muscle memory I barely noticed anymore. My father died 18 months ago on a Wednesday in October, and I have not stopped moving since. The party was Brooke's idea. She threw it in the backyard of the house my father built, the house where I had grown up. The house where she had lived for 11 years, but had never once helped pay a utility bill, and she called it a family celebration. It was July, hot and flat and humid the way Tennessee summers get when the air forgets how to move. She had strung lights across the fence and put out a long table and invited friends I had never met, people from her life who arrived with wine bottles and laughter, and had no idea that the woman refilling the chip bowls and wiping down the countertops was the one actually keeping this family afloat. I had been doing it all afternoon, carrying things from the kitchen, managing the grill when the cousin she had invited burned the first round of burgers, making sure my stepmother had enough to drink and enough to eat, and a comfortable chair in the shade. At some point, I stopped being a guest at a party, and became the invisible infrastructure holding it together. Brooke found me in the kitchen just after 7 o'clock. She was flushed from the heat and from whatever she had been drinking, and she leaned against the counter with the particular confidence of someone who has never once doubted her own position. She was not speaking to me specifically. She was speaking in my direction, which is a different thing. Her voice was loud enough to carry to the people standing on the back porch. "You know what your problem is," she said. "You think you can just disappear from this family whenever things get hard. You forget that we built this life together. You forget that you need us." I set down the serving spoon I was holding, carefully, without looking at her. "You wouldn't last a month without us," she said. "You don't know how to do anything on your own." Several people had drifted toward the kitchen doorway. I could feel them there without turning around. My stepmother was somewhere behind me, silent in the particular way she got silent when she sensed something important was happening and wanted to see how it resolved. I untied the apron from around my waist. I folded it once and set it on the counter next to the serving spoon. Then I picked up my purse and my keys, and I walked out the side door without saying a word. The heat outside was a wall, solid and immediate. I walked to my car, got in, and drove. I did not know where I was going. I just drove until the neighborhood thinned out and the streetlights got farther apart, and I found myself parked in the lot of an all-night diner on the edge of town, engine still running, both hands on the wheel. My phone started ringing before I had time to think. My stepmother. 4 calls in 5 minutes. Brooke. 7. A number I didn't recognize. Once, then again. I turned off the phone and went inside. The diner was mostly empty. A trucker at the counter. A couple sharing a late dinner in the back booth. I sat by the window and ordered coffee I didn't need, and stared at the parking lot while the waitress told me about the pie situation. Which was good tonight, apparently. They still had peach. I ordered the pie. I sat there for a long time. Long enough for the lot outside to empty and fill and empty again. Long enough for the coffee to go cold. I kept thinking about something my father said to me the last time he was well enough to come into the bakery. He walked the floor slowly, the way he moved in those final months, as though the ground required more negotiation than it used to. He stopped at the display case and looked at it for a long moment, and then he looked at me and said, "I want you to know that I saw all of it. Every single thing you did." I had not understood what he meant at the time. I thought he was talking about the bakery. I thought he was proud of the way I had maintained it. I turned my phone back on at 10:15. There was a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize, left at 9:47. I almost deleted it. Instead, I pressed play. "My name is Frank Delgado," the voice said. "I was your father's attorney. I know this call is unexpected, and I apologize for the timing. But there are some things you need to know, and I've been waiting for the right moment to reach out. Tonight seems like that moment. Please call me back when you can." I stared at the phone. I had met Frank Delgado exactly once, at the reading of my father's will. He had been thorough and professional, and had shaken my hand at the end with both of his, holding on a beat longer than was strictly necessary, looking at me with an expression I had not been able to interpret at the time. I understand now that he was measuring something, waiting to see if I was ready. I called him back. He answered on the second ring. "I know it's late," he said. "Thank you for calling." "What things?" I said. "What things do I need to know?" There was a pause. Then he said, "Your father came to me 4 years before he passed. Not for estate planning, for protection." I felt the coffee go cold again in my stomach. "He asked me to protect you specifically," Frank said. He had been watching something develop for a long time, and he was worried about what would happen after he was gone. He made changes, large ones, that he asked me to keep private until you were ready to know about them. I've been watching the situation since he passed, and I believe you're ready." "What kind of changes?" I said. "Come to my office tomorrow," he said. "Bring nothing, just yourself." I paid for the pie I hadn't finished and drove home. Not to the house on Maple, that house, the one with the lights still strung across the fence, the one where my stepmother and Brooke were presumably wondering where I had gone. I drove to my apartment, the one I had kept even after everyone assumed I would move back into the family home after my father died, the one that had always felt like a secret I was keeping from people who wanted me closer so they could use me more conveniently. I sat on my couch in the dark for a long time. My phone had 23 missed calls by the time I turned it off for good that night. Frank Delgado's office was in a building downtown, 4 floors up, with a view of the courthouse and a waiting room that smelled like old coffee and certainty. He was a compact, careful man in his late 60s with silver hair and the kind of stillness that comes from spending decades listening to people tell him the worst things that had ever happened to them. He shook my hand when I came in and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Before I show you anything," he said, "I want to give you context." I nodded. "Your father loved you," he said. "Not in the complicated, conditional way that some parents love their children. He loved you the way a person loves something irreplaceable and permanent. He told me once that you were the best thing he had ever made, and I don't think he was talking about the bakery." My throat tightened. "He also understood your family dynamic with a clarity he rarely spoke aloud," Frank continued. "He knew what was happening in that house. He knew how his wife treated you. He knew what Brooke took from you without asking, and he was afraid that when he was gone, there would be nothing to stop it from getting worse. He opened a drawer and placed a folder on the desk between us. He started making changes 6 years ago," he said. "Gradual, intentional, legally airtight. He transferred the bakery into your name alone. He placed the Maple Avenue property in a trust with you as the sole beneficiary. The business accounts, the commercial equipment, the lease, all of it structured so that no one could access or transfer anything without your explicit authorization." I looked at the folder. "They think it's a joint asset," I said. "My stepmother handles the accounts." "She handles nothing," Frank said quietly. "She has access to a household operating account your father maintained as a courtesy. Every significant asset in that family belongs to you, and has for 6 years. Your father made sure of it." I had to press my hands flat on my thighs to stop them from shaking. He continued. "He couldn't tell you at the time. If he had, he believed someone would have found a way to interfere. So he asked me to wait, to watch, and to reach out when the time came." I looked at the folder. I did not open it. "There's more," Frank said. He placed a second item on the desk. A small key on a plain ring with a paper tag attached to it. On the tag, in my father's handwriting, was the address of a storage unit on the east side of town, and 4 words, "For when you're ready." I recognized his handwriting the way you recognize someone's voice in a dark room immediately, completely, without having to think about it. "Your father kept a record," Frank said carefully, "of things he observed, things he documented. He told me he hoped you would never need it, but he wanted to make sure you had it." I picked up the key. The storage unit was in a low, flat row of orange metal doors on a gravel lot. The number on the tag matched the third door from the end. The key fit. I turned it and lifted the door, and the smell that came out was sawdust and motor oil and something sweet I could not immediately identify. And then I recognized it. Cinnamon. My father's cinnamon rolls. The unit was not large. Along one wall were stacked boxes labeled in his handwriting, old tax records, equipment manuals, holiday decorations from the bakery's early years. In the center sat a workbench he must have moved here at some point, the same folding table he had used in our garage when I was 7. On the workbench was a single metal lockbox, the kind with a combination padlock, and next to the lockbox was a sealed envelope with my name written on the front. I sat on the edge of the workbench and held the envelope for a long moment before I opened it. The note inside was short. His handwriting was less steady than I remembered. This had been written near the end, I realized. The letters still had his particular slant, but they moved across the page more slowly, more deliberately. He wrote, "The combination is the year you sold your first cake at the farmer's market. You were 11. I still have the ribbon they gave you." I had to close my eyes for a moment. The combination worked. The lockbox opened. Inside were 2 labeled envelopes, a USB drive secured in a small plastic sleeve, and a handwritten ledger I recognized as the one he kept behind the counter at the bakery, the original, the one I had assumed was thrown away when we modernized the bookkeeping 2 years ago. I opened the first envelope. Bank statements, printed carefully and clipped together by date. They were from the bakery's main operating account, and for the first several pages they looked normal, exactly what I expected. Then I reached a section flagged with a sticky note in my father's handwriting. "Look at the transfers." I looked. Over the course of 3 years, a pattern. Small amounts at first, $200 here, $500 there, transferred to an account with my stepmother's name on it. Then, larger amounts. Then a recurring monthly transfer, labeled in the memo field as management fee, in a handwriting that was not mine and not my father's. My stepmother's neat, practiced cursive, management fee, for a management position that did not exist in any document I had ever signed. I reached for the second envelope. Inside were screenshots. My father had printed them from his phone, the images slightly blurry at the edges. Text conversations between my stepmother and Brooke. I read them slowly. Brooke had written, "The accountant is asking questions about the transfers." My stepmother had replied, "Don't worry about it. By the time anyone looks closely, things will be settled. She still doesn't understand how any of it works. I took care of it. She still doesn't understand how any of it works." She had meant me. The next screenshot was from a different conversation, just the 2 of them, dated 8 months before my father died. Brooke had written, "Dad's not going to last the year." My stepmother had responded, "I know, but she has been so useful. We need her to stay comfortable and cooperative until the paperwork is handled. She has been so useful." I set the papers down on the workbench and looked at the ceiling of the storage unit for a long time. The fluorescent light hummed faintly. Something dripped somewhere outside. A car passed on the gravel. Useful. That was the word. That was the entire architecture of my life in that house, reduced to a single word. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. The folder that opened contained audio files. There were 11 of them, sorted by date. My father's name was on the file names. I clicked the first one. My father's voice came through the speakers, older sounding than I expected, the particular tiredness of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time. He was speaking to Frank Delgado. "I have been watching this for 4 years now," he said. "I documented what I could, but I need you to understand the full picture. Patricia has been withdrawing from the business account. Not large amounts. Not all at once, she is too careful for that. But consistently. Over time. Frank's voice. Have you confronted her? No, my father said. If I confront her, she will either deny it or she will turn it around and use it to make my daughter feel guilty for causing problems in the family. I have seen her do that before. My daughter does not know how to protect herself from that. She is too good. She has always been too good. I pressed pause. I sat there in the storage unit with my father's voice still hanging in the air around me, and I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes and breathed very slowly. He had known. He had known all of it. He had been protecting me from across the distance of his own illness, building walls between me and the people he had let into our lives. And he had done it quietly, patiently, the same way he did everything without announcing it, without asking for credit. I played the remaining files. The second was a conversation between my father and a different attorney, earlier, discussing the property transfer. The third was my father alone, reading from what sounded like the ledger, narrating the dates and amounts of each irregular transfer he had caught. The fourth was a recording from the bakery. My father's phone propped somewhere, catching a conversation between my stepmother and Brooke in the front of the store when they thought no one was listening. Brooke saying, "She'll never figure it out. She trusts everything." My stepmother saying, "I know. That's why we have to handle it now, before he's gone and she gets ideas. Before he's gone and she gets ideas." I closed the laptop. I gathered everything back into the lockbox, locked it, and carried it to my car. My phone had 15 missed calls. I drove to the diner again. Same booth by the window. Different pie situation, they were out of peach. I called Frank. "I found it," I said. "I know," he said. "Are you all right?" I thought about that for a moment. "I will be," I said. "Good," he said. "Now here is what I need you to know. Your stepmother and Brooke are currently locked out of every significant account. The bakery's primary operating account, the property records, the business licensing, the vendor contracts, all of it routes through your name and your authorization only. They do not know this yet. They have been operating under the assumption that they share access with you." "When will they find out?" I said. Frank was quiet for a moment. "My guess is they've already started to notice," he said. "Small things. A declined transaction. A system that won't accept their login. By tomorrow morning it will be unavoidable." "What do I do?" I said. "Nothing," he said. "You do absolutely nothing. You do not call them back. You do not explain. You let the consequences arrive on their own, because they will arrive regardless. That is how your father designed it." I ordered the cherry pie. By 9 the next morning, my phone had 41 missed calls. I did not listen to voicemails. I read the texts, which were easier to manage at a distance. My stepmother, "Sweetheart, the bakery system is showing some kind of error and we can't process the morning orders. Please call when you get this." Brooke, "Where are you? The suppliers are calling. Dad's accountant says there's a problem." My stepmother again, "This is urgent. Whatever is happening with the accounts, we need to fix it together." Brooke, "You are being incredibly selfish right now. People are depending on that bakery." Then later, "Are you doing this on purpose? Because if you are, this is not okay." Then, "We are your family. You can't just disappear." I read that last one twice. Then I put my phone in my pocket and walked to Frank's office. He met me in the lobby. He handed me a coffee and led me upstairs without speaking. When we were in his office with the door closed, he placed a single folder on the desk. "They attempted 3 transactions this morning," he said. "A supplier payment, a payroll deposit, and a withdrawal from the main account. All 3 were denied. The bank called me at 8:45. His expression was careful. "They also called your stepmother to confirm her account access status," he continued, "at which point she discovered that her name is not on the primary account. It has not been on the primary account for 4 years." I looked at the folder. Frank slid it toward me. Inside was a document I recognized, the bakery lease, the original, with signatures on the bottom. "My signature, only my signature. You are the leaseholder," Frank said. "You are the owner of record for the business. Your stepmother is listed on the household account and nothing else. Everything she believed she controlled. She controlled at your father's discretion, and then at yours. And neither of you was required to continue extending that courtesy. She managed the books, I said. For 3 years. She transferred money out of the business into her personal account for 3 years, Frank said. You managed the books. She accessed them. I sat back in the chair. The door to Frank's office opened briefly. His assistant leaned in and said, quietly, that my stepmother was online too and had called 4 times in the past hour. Don't answer, Frank said, without looking up. The assistant withdrew. There is something else, Frank said. He reached into his desk and produced an envelope I recognized immediately. The paper was cream-colored. The handwriting on the front was my father's, and in the upper corner he had written, "Open this when they finally show their hand." I took it. My hands were steadier than I expected. Inside was a letter, 2 pages, written in the measured, unhurried way my father wrote everything. He began, "If you're reading this, then you have found the box, and you have seen the records, and you understand now what I was protecting you from. I want to say first that I am sorry. I am sorry I chose the soft way out for too long. I am sorry I let things continue past the point where they should have been stopped. I told myself it was for peace. What I know now is that it was for my peace, not yours. You were never at peace in that house. You were at work." I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth. He had written, "You are not what they made you. You are not useful. You are not a function in someone else's system. You are the person who got up before dawn to make sure the bread was ready and never once asked anyone to thank you for it. I want you to know that I thanked you every day in my heart, and I am thanking you now, and I am sorry it took me until after I was gone to say it out loud where it counted." He wrote, "The bakery is yours. It was always yours. I built it thinking I was building it for the family, but when I watched you grow into it, I understood that I had been building it for you all along. Protect it. But more than that, protect yourself. You have always been worth more than what they offered you to stay." I folded the letter. I held it against my chest for a moment, the way you hold something warm when the room has gotten cold. Frank waited. When I looked up, he said, "They'll come here, probably today. They'll attempt everything they can think of. Guilt, legal challenge, accusation. I want you to be prepared for that." "I am," I said. He studied me. "You look different than you did yesterday." "I feel different," I said. They came at 2:00, exactly as Frank had predicted. My stepmother arrived first, composed in the brittle way of someone who has spent the morning deciding how to appear calm. She was followed by Brooke, who had dispensed with composure entirely and arrived looking like a woman who had been running on adrenaline and grievance since sunrise. Behind them was a man I didn't recognize, their attorney, Frank told me quietly when they appeared in the conference room doorway. Their attorney's name was Garrett. He was young and effortful, the kind of lawyer who compensated for uncertainty with volume. My stepmother sat down across from me and looked at me the way she had been looking at me for 15 years, with a softness that functioned as pressure, warmth deployed as a tool. "Sweetheart," she said, "I think there has been a serious misunderstanding." "There hasn't been," I said. Brooke's jaw tightened. "The bakery," my stepmother continued, "is a family asset. Your father always intended it to be managed as a family enterprise. Whatever happened with the legal paperwork was clearly an oversight, and it was not an oversight," Frank said pleasantly. He pushed a document across the table. The transfer was intentional, documented in detail, and executed 4 years before your husband's death while he was in full cognitive capacity. His signatures are notarized. His intentions are recorded in multiple attorney consultations. There is no ambiguity here. Their attorney opened his mouth. Frank looked at him calmly. "I would encourage you not to challenge the estate," Frank said. "Doing so would open the financial records to formal review, which would reveal certain irregularities that I suspect you would prefer not to have examined by a court." Brooke's face went very still. My stepmother's composure cracked at the edges, not enough for anyone who didn't know her well to notice, but I had been watching her face for 15 years. "Irregularities," Garrett said carefully. Frank opened the evidence binder. He placed the bank statements on the table, first the ones with the highlighted transfers, 3 years of steady withdrawals into my stepmother's personal account. He placed the printed screenshots beside them. He placed a summary document that Cameron, the family's accountant, had quietly prepared after Frank reached out to him the previous evening. My stepmother looked at the documents. Her attorney looked at them. Brooke stared at the surface of the table. The total, Frank said, over 3 years, amounts to a figure substantial enough that the appropriate term is embezzlement. Brooke closed her eyes. We always intended to pay it back, my stepmother said immediately. Her voice was still controlled. It was temporary. We were managing a difficult transition, and You were stealing from your stepdaughter, Frank said. That is the correct word for it. Silence. My stepmother turned to me. There was something desperate now in the softness she was performing. I've always thought of you as my own, she said. You know that. We have been a family. None of this needed to happen if I had just stayed quiet, I said. She stopped. If I had just kept getting up at 4 in the morning and running the operation and signing whatever you put in front of me and never asked what happened to the money? I finished the sentence for her. That is exactly what this is, I said. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shaking. My voice came out even and clear the way my father's voice had been even and clear in those recordings he left. The quiet of someone who has already decided. You needed me functional and cooperative and unaware, and you made sure I stayed that way for as long as you could manage it. Brooke said, very quietly. I didn't know about all of the transfers. I looked at her. Some of it, she said. Not all of it. Mom said it was a management arrangement. She is telling the truth, Frank said unexpectedly. The financial records show your stepmother was the primary actor. Brooke's direct involvement is limited to the communications I've already shared. Brooke pressed her fingertips to her mouth. You still said I wouldn't last without you, I said. Her eyes filled. Their attorney was whispering something to my stepmother. I could not hear the words, only the tone. The flat, measured tone of a lawyer who has assessed a situation and determined his client's position to be untenable. My stepmother pushed back from the table slightly. She was rearranging something behind her expression. What do you want? She said. What is it going to take? Frank slid the relinquishment documents across the table. Your client signs, Frank said, relinquishing all claims to the bakery, the Maple Avenue property, and the business accounts. In exchange, we do not file a criminal complaint with the district attorney's office today. Today, my stepmother repeated. Today, Frank confirmed. The room was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, the city moved around us, ordinary and indifferent. My stepmother picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking. She signed. Brooke did not move for a moment after her mother's signature hit the page. Then she reached across and picked up the second document, the one with only her name on it. She read it carefully. Then she signed it. When their attorney gathered the papers and they filed out of the conference room, my stepmother paused at the door. She did not look at me. She looked at the wall above my head, and she said, Your father would be disappointed in how this turned out. I let that sit in the air for a moment. Then I said, My father built the box I found his records in. He spent his last years protecting me from you. I think I know exactly how my father would feel about how this turned out. She left. The door clicked shut. Frank set both hands flat on the table and exhaled. You, he said, were extraordinary. My father was extraordinary, I said. I just showed up. 2 weeks later, Brooke called me. She had been in therapy, she said, which I had not expected. She had told her therapist about the conversation in the conference room, and her therapist had told her that the most important thing she could do was not ask for forgiveness but simply acknowledge what had happened without framing it in a way that served herself. So, she was calling, she said, to acknowledge it. I sat on my apartment couch with the phone against my ear, and I listened to her carefully. I went along with things I should have questioned, she said. I told myself that was just how families worked, that somebody always carried more than their share. But the truth is that I knew you were the one carrying it, and I let it happen because it was convenient. I did not respond immediately. She said, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I see it. I appreciate that, I said. I mean it. The silence that followed was not comfortable, but it was honest, and honest silence is sometimes better than comfortable conversation. We said goodnight. I set the phone on the cushion beside me. Outside, The evening was settling into the kind of summer dark that is still warm, still soft, the heat of the day releasing slowly into the sky. Through the window, I could see the light on in the bakery across the street. I had moved my apartment intentionally, 6 months after my father died, so I could see his sign from my window at night. I sat there looking at it for a long time. My phone buzzed once. A message from Frank. "The final property documents filed today. Everything is official. Congratulations." I set the phone down. I thought about the morning 2 weeks ago when I had stood in the storage unit and heard my father's voice come out of a laptop speaker in the middle of the silence, patient and unhurried and certain, the voice of a man who had been arranging things on my behalf without my knowledge, who had trusted me to be ready when the time came. I had been so afraid, for so long, that I was not the kind of person things worked out for. I had watched the people around me take and assume the world would provide, and I had believed, in some small, quiet part of myself, that their confidence was evidence of something, that if they were so certain of their own worth, maybe the math worked out the way they said and I was the variable, not them. I did not believe that anymore. The bakery sign glowed on the other side of the street, my grandmother's name in my father's handwriting, reproduced in light, steady, and permanent. I whispered into the empty apartment, "I see it now, Dad." The evening was warm and still. Somewhere below, a neighbor's radio played something easy and unhurried. The street was quiet in the way streets get quiet in summer when the day has finally finished with everyone. I had a meeting with the bakery staff in the morning. I had a supplier contract to renegotiate and a new hire to train and a head pastry chef who had been with the bakery since the beginning and deserved a raise. I had been putting off authorizing for 6 months because I had been too busy, cushioning other people from the consequences of their own decisions. There was a great deal of work ahead. For the first time in as long as I could remember, that thought felt like possibility rather than weight. They had told me I would not last without them. They had said it in front of people. The way you say things you are absolutely certain of. The way you say the sky is blue. But the bakery was mine. The building was mine. The accounts were mine. My name was on every document that mattered, and it had been for years. And I had been too busy carrying everyone else to notice what my father had been quietly building around me. I was not what they had needed me to be. I was what my father had always known I was, and I was just getting started.